Morning, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes while everyone jumps onto the webinar, but we'll be getting started fairly quickly. So just hang tight. And as you can see by the title there, so role of user experience design in the business ecosystem, that is the topic of today. So if that's not what you came for, you're probably in the wrong spot, but hopefully you did. I'm pretty excited about this one. So yeah, just a few minutes to go. If you guys are just joining now, we're just going to wait a few minutes for everyone to jump onto the webinar. So just hang tight, but we'll be getting started in about 2 minutes or so. I think maybe next time I'll have music on at the beginning. Something to get the mood going.
What's your style, Eric?
Of music?
Yeah.
To sing myself or to listen to?
Sing yourself. I think that would probably be the best way to eke out the 2 minutes.
I could sing it myself. My style of music to sing myself is bad music. To play maybe a little jazz funk, nose flute, I'm not sure.
It's surprising that you had the jazz flute waiting for you. You didn't even know you'd be up on stage today.
That's where I went. My head went straight to jazz flute. Yeah, I'm not sure what that says about me, but. All right, probably just about 30 seconds to go. Hopefully we're just building up the excitement, in the room at the moment. Okay, I think we're gonna go now. So welcome to today's webinar. My name is Eric. I work for a company called Academy XI. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered today, past, present, and emerging. So as I mentioned at the beginning, today's session is on the role of user experience design in business and how it relates to the business ecosystem as a whole. Before we get into that, I'll kind of just talk a little bit about Academy XI for those of you who don't know who we are, just because that will help to explain why we are talking about this subject and why it's important to us and why we hopefully know what we're talking about. So Academy XI is a school. We've got 2 campuses, one in Sydney and one in Melbourne, so Australian based. I'm here in Australia despite my accent. And then we have a whole suite of online courses as well. We teach emerging disciplines, which is kind of a fancy term for job roles where there'll be more the next year than there are today and more the year after that. Those tend to break down broadly into the design and digital spaces. And we started our existence as a UX school exclusively. So user experience design is close to our heart. It remains the thing that we teach the most of. Both face-to-face and online, although obviously face-to-face has come to a bit of a grinding halt for obvious reasons. But luckily we do have all these online courses and we were able to shift online fairly, quite successfully actually. So that's us. I'm the head of team training, so corporate training department. In the design space with corporate training, we teach 2 different audiences, I guess you could say. One of those audiences is sort of just any department, really, finance, marketing, legal, could be anything. And those are sort of intro to design courses that we teach. So intro to human-centered design, UX specifically as well. It's not about turning those people into UXers, CXers, service designers per se. It's about giving them some of the tools that designers and digital practitioners use, and bringing them into their own spaces. And also so that when they do deal with UXers, other designers, they have an understanding of what those spaces are about so that they can get better outcomes for their own departments, really, for those teams. So that's one type of training. The other type of training that we do is for team leads, well, teams in the UX space, in the CX space, service design space. And so that tends to be more technical upskilling. So either for teams in that role, or we're standing up a new team within a business, or yeah, we're redeploying an employee into a UX role, etc. So it's two different audiences, quite different, but with the same sort of subject matter sitting at the core of it, which is UX. So we thought it would be kind of cool today to talk about UX and where it sits within the business ecosystem through two lenses. So one of those lenses is for the non-designer who wants to know more about UX, how they can sort of leverage it or how they can work with UXers. And then the other is for UXers themselves, both team leads and practitioners, right through from, junior to middleweight up to senior designers. So that's kind of going to be the broad topic. And then those will be the two lenses. We're actually going to have kind of two sections to the webinar. First, we're going to have our amazing guest, who I'll introduce shortly, going to do a bit of a presentation around, what a UXer is and does, and also the ecosystem that they work in, specifically within the design and digital space. So how they interact with product managers, product owners, how they interact with CXers, how they interact with business analysts, all the other people in the design digital space who've got skin in the game, basically, for getting products out the door. And then after that, we're going to switch over to kind of an interview phase with myself and our guest, who I'll introduce very shortly. And that'll be more discussing how UXers interact with the larger companies. So again, like finance, legal, marketing, etc., through those two lenses. So there'll be questions kind of that'll be of interest to non-designers, and then there'll be questions that'll be of interest to designers, all about interacting with the larger company or interacting with UX. So obviously, based on what you've just heard, there's a fair bit to get through. So I will jump in, a few housekeeping things, then we'll jump in to introduce our guest. Down at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button and a chat button. So anything that you wanted to just mention can go into the chat, or if you just want to introduce yourself to ourselves, either the people in the room, feel free to do that. Or on the other side, the Q&A at the end of this session, as with all the webinars that we do, if you've been on others, we've got about a 15-minute question and answer period from you guys. So if you write your questions in there, I'm going to be kind of monitoring them during Kelvin's presentation. And at the end, I'll be sort of picking as many as I can, and we'll be asking and answering those questions for the last 15 minutes. So yeah, fire those in at any time or at the end, whatever works for you, really. So yeah, that's kind of the housekeeping pieces. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Kelvin Dart, who I'm going to let him introduce himself, because he's probably going to do a way better job than I possibly could. But he's the real deal when it comes to UX and the digital space in general. So welcome, Kelvin.
Thanks very much, Eric. And just before I get started, really appreciate the invitation from Academy XI. We've had a long-standing relationship, both personally with some of the founders of Academy XI, and then throughout the years, we've had the opportunity to be on panel talks, for individual talks, and we've had some really good, talented people come across from Academy XI to join our company. So keep up the good work. I'll just do a bit of a share screen to get started. I hope this does work.
I'm seeing something, so you're off to a good
start. That is a terrific start. I'm just going to go to share.
That is actually the thing that I get the most worried about on any of these.
Oh, absolutely. It's all good in theory, and then you start clicking.
Yeah, especially as a digital company, and the
worst. Yeah. And look, I am going to apologize in advance. I was hoping that one of my beloved founders and colleagues was going to pretty this up a little bit more, but he's just had a newborn, and apparently it all went pear-shaped last night. So unfortunately, you'll be seeing a presentation from somewhat of a non-designer, but hopefully the content can serve us well.
Just means it's more from the heart, Kelvin.
Exactly. As I mentioned, our very own's been running for about just over 3 years now. It was formed by 3 individuals that met at a previous consulting firm called Odecee, largely an engineering firm, but then forayed into design. Had a fantastic opportunity to meet my other 2 co-founders, one who is head of technology, solution architect, brilliant human being. The other, Oz Ibrahim, who's actually done a few panels in the past with Academy XI, 15 plus years experience in all facets of design. I would call him a full stack designer. Myself, I came from the humble beginnings of a multimedia degree, realized I wasn't that strong in design, so more forayed into the commercial side of building products. And I've really had a lot of experience in product strategy. Subsequent to that, though, I've led a lot of design teams, a lot of innovation teams, and actually to the humble beginnings of building this business, got back into being a UX practitioner to varying degrees. So hopefully I give you guys a good lens of all the facets of not only where a UXer sits within an organization, but for those that aren't really across UX, the importance and implications of that particular role. But for us as an organization, we work with a multitude of different clients. So you'll see a lot of brands there that hopefully you know, and some brands that you don't know. But we do everything from CX, UX, UI, front-end development. We more call ourselves like an innovation company in a lot of ways. We build our own products, and we also help service and bring great products and services to life for other clients as well.
For those of you not from Australia, those are some big names.
Of course, I forgot to mention there might be some people from overseas, but there's some big brands there and some awesome startups that we've also worked with as well as some non-for-profits. But really today's focus is almost just succinctly a practical guide for UXers to understand your ecosystem from different lenses, and again for non-designers to also understand not only where UX sits, but how we can help get the best out of UXers and their practice. So we all want to achieve a great user experience, but the thing that I'll reiterate, possibly ad nauseum through this presentation is the need for compromise and the need to understand constraints in which the environment you work. So for designers, the ultimate goal is trying to get to that centerpiece, and really where you'll naturally sway is on the left-hand side. You'll be really focused on the end consumer and the end user. You'll then look at that sort of pink space. So from a design, what do the aesthetics look like? What does the navigation look like? You know, what are the nuances that makes things really intuitive for users? But that can't come at the cost of making sure that things are delivered. You know, from a technology perspective, what's actually feasible to do from a product strategy and finance perspective. What are the constraints to deliver a product? We're never going to get everything we need, and we need to understand that a good design is actually as much as the compromises we make internally and the push and pull that we have to do as a team to actually deliver a great outcome, which in our mind might not be the optimum outcome, but is still the best based on the set of circumstances. And look, there's a raft of different people that you know, some are external forces, can be government, can be compliance, can be competition moving at a thorough pace, can be completely upheavals to business models. There's conversations happening that we're never just going to be privy to. You know, there's going to be conversations happening at the C-suite. There's going to be finance, legal, supply chain, security, all these other people that will be pulling levers to our ultimate outcomes. And some of those you'll be able to influence, but some of them you just need to be aware of. So I'll say from the outset, things like town halls, things that where you can go and seek information, anything online in terms of annual reports that are getting out, get across these things. So at least you understand within the organization you're either working with. It can be in-house or consulting. You've got a really strong sense of what the key drivers to the business are, because they will have a big impact on what you're trying to achieve. And even with our business unit, there are different motives. And that just sounds a little bit ridiculous to say when you're sort of, all for one for all, getting into a project together. When we think about it and when we start a project, this is it. Like we can all sit there, whether or not we're technologists and whether or not we're BAs, data analysts, project managers, product owners. We're all seeking the top of this pyramid. We all want to make something meaningful. And so I always remember when I first started a project, I'm so built up with excitement. We're talking about our goals. Everyone's sort of smiling and laughing and clapping and applauding. And then we start the project. And then the realities start to kick in. And so although the developers start with decent intent, they've got one core concern: get this bloody thing working. It needs to actually be functional. So what we build needs to make sure it's reliable, needs to make sure it's hitting performance and hitting a lot of the non-functional things that sometimes ourselves as UXers don't think about. So it's very much making sure it's connected to the APIs, making sure that it's actually sitting on a platform that can make sure it's scalable, so things don't fall over. And case in point with retail at the moment, making sure it's robust, making sure it's secure, making sure privacy is done. So reliable and functional, although meaningful sounds great, when we get to the day-to-day of a developer, their core focus rightfully is functional and reliable. Now, product owners, and this is not to say all product owners will sit in this chasm of convenient and usable, they're also seeking the same thing that us as designers are seeking. But then they've got other constraints that we may not be aware of. There might be time to market, there might be external forces, other pressures, budgetary constraints, shareholder drivers, competitive pressures, or even just in terms of things like restructuring, other people coming in and out of the business, those type of things. There's a lot of other factors and a lot of other pressures that are put on that may find ourselves speaking to BAs and product people that may just be looking for that middle chasm. So what's usable? What can we get to MVP? What's convenient and easy to use? And let's worry about the pleasurable, meaningful stuff when we know that we've got something that's getting return on investment, and then I can go back with a business case. And then for those that are designers on this call, yeah, of course, we're looking for the ultimate goal. And we're getting deep into this research. We're really understanding the key pain points of our users and consumers. Now, we're hearing the voice of the customer, and we want to make sure that our solutions meet all of those things. We want to avoid we want to remove the pain, and we want to create this amazing, meaningful and pleasurable experience. And that's just the reality when we kick into projects. So our job as UXers is to influence those in order to achieve the best outcome we can, rather than the best outcome. And also just accepting the fact that, yeah, there will be compromises.
Yeah, I think there's one sort of, just to jump in, Kelvin, something
Absolutely.
that I kind of preach on all the time in our training, both for individuals and for like corporates, is as a designer, like it's all about being human-centered, and you think of that in the context of the user. But I think there's a really good chance that a lot of, maybe not a lot, but maybe some designers miss is be human-centered to your colleagues, to the other people within the business. Try and drill down and be like, when you're talking to a product owner, if you're talking to someone from C-suite, try and be like, what does this person care about? What are they stressed out about? Like, what are they being held accountable for? Because I mean, often maybe they're like, crapping all over you, and you can't figure out why. And then if you look a little deeper, you're like, oh, they're super stressed because they need to get this thing out to market by a certain date. They've got shareholders breathing down their neck or something. And it really sort of changes the whole dialogue that you can have with them if you can sort of see what their drivers are. And then if you can help them along that path, all of a sudden you're looking pretty good. And then you can sort of get your own wins on the board as well, I think. So yeah, being human-centered with colleagues and within the business context is super important.
It's a perfect way to say it, Eric. I think that the key point is that they're all in your own mind. They're all your customers. You're trying to achieve an outcome with them. They're your team members. They're in the trenches with you. So how do you start to get that buy-in through a bit of humility, through some empathy? And that's what we'll talk about as part of these 7 lessons.
Yeah, cool.
So lesson number 1, it's right to Eric's point. Don't just understand the project objectives and what the outcomes are. And this isn't just for consultants. This is for people that are working in-house, but understand the decision makers within your team. What are their motives? What are their backgrounds? And this can be not just in terms of their backgrounds professionally, but what are their cultural backgrounds? Learn to understand them at a level that you potentially would your own user groups and creating your own persona types. But as a working example, a designer might find that the latest framework that they really want to implement, and change the way in which we work as a collective group. So that's a side motive that's happening with the designer. For a BA or a product owner, there could be large impacts on their career. If this falls over, if this goes pear-shaped, they might be riding on this big business case that they got across the line, and they might be getting pressures that you're not even aware of. And then for a tech team or a tech lead, they might have just been handed a tech team, and yes, there's some work to do. Obviously, there's things like development ops and setting up platforms and making sure that everything's ready to go. But at the same time, they've got their own pressures to get stuff thrown across the fence. They can actually start developing things. So it's not necessarily giving into these things. It's actually just having a broad understanding of those real pressures and those backgrounds, personally and professionally, so you can actually start to see things through different lenses. Define constraints up front. As I said at the start of any project, everyone's excited. It's a blank slate. The world is optimistic. The sun is shining. There's no COVID. Like, we're ready to go. And what we fail to do is that we tend to have these conversations in the 11th hour. So you're 2 or 3 months down the track. The deadlines are really coming up close. All of a sudden, you're starting to uncover those constraints. And for designers, you might have just gone down a rabbit hole. So you might just be going down this full exploration. You're going down the beautiful divergence of double diamond, and yet you've failed to actually have conversations up front with your technical colleagues, with your product owners, to really understand what is the space, what's the rails in which you're going to be designing in. So at least at that point, you've got that in the back of your mind as you're going through your discovery phase. For non-designers, just setting up time with your design and tech team, and really being honest as you can be within the information you have. So if say for example, you might be part of a guild group where you've got more visibility of what's happening outside of your project in other business units. So if you know that other projects are going to impact, even if there's a small propensity that they may or may not, or they may not get off the ground, just be open and transparent. So everyone's got a mindfulness of the environment in which you're starting a project. And then for technical people, just know that you're not going to have delivery ready designs straight up front. It's just not going to be the reality, especially for projects that are just getting off the ground. So get as close, I mean, we can't do it physically right now, but just have one-to-one catch-ups with the UX team. Like, embed yourself in their processes so you can understand as early when research is coming out. Don't wait for showcases. Like, get a quick whip. It can be as informal as it can be, but it's like, hey, what are the themes that are coming out? Where do you think the information architecture is going to go? And at least then you can start making guesses to developing whatever it might be, a website or a mobile application or something physical. Number 3, everybody needs to have a say in project Gantt charts. And I speak to this at a very, very personal level. I've had projects that have succeeded because I took the time to make sure that it was done in a really democratic way, that we all sat down and had really robust conversations around what the ultimate thing would look like in terms of a designer having, full reign to do 8 weeks of, deep anthropology and contextual research, yada, 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 to, okay, well, this is the constraints of the budget. So what does that revised version look like? And are you happy to accept that? Therefore, you're not having conversations later on, which was, well, I didn't have enough time to execute that. I didn't have enough resources to execute that. So for non-designers, don't navel gaze. Don't sit there and just do your Gantt chart and then get that signed off and move forward. And don't speak on behalf of those that need to deliver for you. You need to make sure that it's done in a community way. And then for developers, make sure that you're not scaling up too early. We've really suffered in the past from projects that are suffering from technical debt, literally because people are just scratching their bums and waiting for things. So making sure that you're working with designers and product people to make sure you're scaling up at the right time. 4, and I know this is painful to hear, but you need to be at peace that not all assumptions and not all hypotheses will be validated prior to design. There almost needs to be 2 streams in a lot of ways. You do have people waiting for you to start to distill, synthesize, come with a set of recommendations. What we tend to do is try to do 2 separate streams. One is almost that discovery and innovation phase, hypothesis phase. At the same time, what can you agree upon and what can you put in a quadrant to say, this doesn't need to be tested. We can and go and design these things. And it might be, it might be login screens. It might be setting screens. It might be something just enabling other team members to get going with designs. And for product people and for project people, just make some hard decisions up front. Really define what's critical for day one or MVP. And then for developers, just be aware that what's being tested and what the business will bear the risk of. And just so you've got a sense of what you can start pocking out. And this is just a bit of a tool that I've sort of used recently just to help shape that up. So a lot of pre-work is done to this in terms of categories, themes, things that are coming out. But then what you want to start to do is at least put this in a sense of on the right top quadrant, agreeing on what the hypotheses that need to be tested, but also on the left-hand side, agreeing what can we just start designing against, but also getting agreement with product people to understand, hey, we don't need to test, but also, is this a day one thing? Do we actually need this for day one? And then the 4th quadrant is, look, this needs to go and, back into a discovery phase that we're not really going to focus on for this product. So you either bin it or you postpone it. Lesson 5, and we say this a lot in market, especially as an innovation company that's heavy in the design space, but go slow to go fast. And make sure you're communicating constantly throughout though. The biggest thing I'll say is as soon as you touch code, that's where the money is. That's where debt starts to rise very quickly. So as much as in a time essence, yes, design takes time. Recruiting people, interviewing people, doing prototypes, synthesizing findings, all this stuff takes time. However, we might be talking about 1, maybe 2 people doing that synth, that research, those things. So at a cost level, we're talking about probably maybe 3, 6 to 8 weeks to get that done, whatever the size and the magnitude of the problem you're trying to solve or product you're trying to deliver is. Now, do that times potentially 3, 4, because that's the amount of developers that you're going to need to deliver an outcome. The amount of time it takes to develop is a lot longer than it takes to design. So go slow to go fast, which means when you're ready to hand over to development, whether or not you're running agile, waterfall, whatever it might be, but when you're ready to hand over and when you're ready to start touching code, that they've got a strong sense of a pipeline of designs that they've got, but also making sure that they understand why they're doing things as well. So it's just as important. So this is a really big call out to people like myself, product people and project people. Realize that research is an exploratory art form. It's not putting a tag in a piece of code that you're extracting some quantitative data to understand user behavior. You're going down a qualitative research path. It does take time. Of course, there's constraints, but please allow as much time and freedom as you can with your designers so they can get the right outcomes in the voice of the customer. And just a tip for designers, as I said, it needs to be constant communication. So don't go into a dark hole with your research. Don't. And it is hard. I know that, it's exhausting going through your qualitative research, especially one-to-one or focus groups, one back to back. It is tiring. And then you've got to sit there and try to pull out these themes and distill that into a sense of epics and all of that stuff. But whips are just as important because if you go down that rabbit hole, if you isolate yourself away from this, then naturally people that are non-designers are wondering what the hell's going on. And when you do your whips, please just make sure that you are bringing this back to the objectives. And you can, as I said, you can do this ad nauseum. I don't care. But highlight the things in which research is extracting the themes and how they tied back to the strategy and the overall objectives of the projects as you know it. Lesson 6, find the balance between research, prototyping and delivery. And as I mentioned before, designers are going to have to wear multiple hats. Now, the hope is, and I'll point straight to non-designers, people that are setting up the project, budget, etc., is that making sure you've got the right capacity and capability for team members to do this work. Don't set expectations that you're going to have one person that, yes, has the capability to do UX and UI and research, that they're going to be able to cover all of this, because it is really difficult, especially when you're going through a research phase. So what you want to try to do is couple up the right amount of CX, service design capability if you need it, into UX and UI. And for designers, try to set up multiple streams. So yes, as you're going through, say for example, writing an interview script, why not set up a visual design language board and get the community to start inputting into that. So even technical people, even product people, get them to start referencing other external materials that they think's relevant and interesting and contextual for what you're going to design. So they all feel like it's, coming together, or they can get a sense of being a part of the visual journey as well. So it is a little bit difficult to set up, and I know, but you've got to try to find that balance in between your research going into rapid prototyping and delivery, that other people are counting on you at the same time, and set those expectations up front. So just some tools to be aware of, and I know those that have gone through Academy XI would certainly know these tools, but for those that are thinking about it or have not been in the design fraternity for too long, Miro's really become a great collaboration tool, more than ever with remote working. It just sort of helps sets the scene for strategy design. We're using it at the moment for that framework I just showed you earlier. User testing, it is really difficult sometimes to recruit. Usertesting.com is a great substitute for that if you need to sort of get some qualitative and quantitative data back en masse, or user validation. Sketch, look, people still use XD. I'm not fussed one way or the other. I don't get paid to promote either one or the other. I just find Sketch a little bit easier. It links in very well with InVision and Craft. And also Figma's become a pretty decent industry standard interactive prototyping tool. So just something to be aware of. Those that are sort of transitioning from InVision, it's pretty easy to switch across to Figma, but it's just something to be aware of. Last but not least, when you get in front, and I know everything I've said just sounds exhausting for designers, so I apologize in advance. And this is probably me being a product person saying, what's next? But once you're on top, don't rest. Be in constant communication with your product people to say, what's the backlog? What's future state look like? What's near state look like? Because you're going to get some real pearls of wisdom coming out of that research. But then you're going to find that we can't just execute those things on day one. So why not use the time once you get in front? Because there will be a period of time when you are on top, when you can start saying, why aren't things getting delivered? When you're not the whipping boy, so to speak, in the project, that you're going to have some freedom to look at what the next phase is. And what you want to do is you can really start generating that pipe collectively with the product owner to go and look at what's the next round of hypothesis or problem definition statements that we need to go and validate. So once you sort of get past that first iteration, that day one look, you're really in front of the game. And for non-product people, just make sure that there is enough. Always be future thinking. And for technical people, just try to keep across that backlog as much as you can, so at least you know what's coming down the pipe. So really some final thoughts to consider. Number one, accept that there are politics, especially in large organizations, but to be honest, even in small organizations. And rather than fighting against that, it's just sometimes as important just to learn how to navigate through red tape. So in real terms, I mean, reach out to legal, have a coffee with them, go and understand it, knowing that somewhere down the line, you're probably going to need to speak to them, have a chat to people that are in security or in compliance. Anticipate the people that are going to possibly impact your outcomes, and just know and start to draw a relationship with them. And it doesn't have to be a facade. You generally just get to know people and understand them. And so when it comes time to negotiate with them on outcomes, that they know you as a person. As a product owner, I know that the costs of getting things wrong at the start are far greater down the time than actually executing a little bit delayed. So please give allowances where you can. And I run predominantly a design consulting firm, so there's a bit of bias associated with this, but please just give as much time as you can. What you're trying to really do is de-risk as much as you can up front, to make sure that you're not dissatisfying your users. And then everything we can do as a team comes back to the ultimate goals of the service and product and project. So when I run projects, before I do any stand-up, any rituals, any retrospectives, whatever it might be, I just establish the goals of what we're trying to achieve. So everything needs to play back to those goals. And if you've set up KPIs, just reiterate it constantly so it's embedded in our DNA as we work through projects. That is enough of my ramblings for the time being. So I'll just, I'll get up the stop share for a moment.
This is directed rambling, I would say. No, super, super helpful and insightful. I think, thank you very much for putting that together. It's really interesting to hear. Yeah, I think especially for people who are just sort of, if you're just new to UX, sort of, junior, you tend to think only about the actual craft of delivering of product and, wireframing and user flows, et cetera. And it's easy to forget about you're part of a big business with a lot of different stuff going on and people with a lot of different, constraints and goals and agendas. So you kind of can get thrown into the deep end with that. We try to, like, when we help our graduates get jobs, we sort of, we do a lot of career training and, like all that sort of thing, but it can be a little bit of a jarring thing when you get in and you realize that not everyone's trying to only deliver the best possible user experience all the time. There are other agendas. So I think that came across really strongly. So now we're going to go into the questions section of the webinar. So this, just to reiterate, will be a very casual and obviously amazing conversation on Kelvin's side, at least. Didn't mean to talk myself up there, but and this will be more around questions for how complete non-designers interact with the design space. So people across, as Kelvin was saying, like in legal, in compliance, in finance, in marketing, like how do they interact with the design function and UX in specific within a business. So to start off, I'm going to ask probably what seems like a simple, but is actually a super hard question. So speaking to all the non-designers in the room at the moment, Kelvin, how would you describe UX in one sentence?
It's a great question. I had to write this one down, literally just based on the notion that I could have gone down a rabbit hole. But what I actually wrote down thinking about this from a non-designer perspective is really that the function is to just remove as many assumptions, subjectivity, ambiguity on the customer wants and needs, just through customer validation. And what that means in real terms is going to speak to the customer rather than you theorizing about what you think they need. Yeah,
I usually just describe it as just making things customers want.
Exactly. Yeah, perfect.
And not stuff that they don't want. And don't assume that you know what they want until you've actually gone and talked to them.
Yeah.
Don't let the exec team say they know, because they might. They'll have good insight, but it's not the be all and end all.
Correct.
More on that to come. So that's for like sort of a non-designer question. So now for designers, what's the most prevalent thing you find that non-designers think UX is that maybe it isn't? What's the most common misconception?
Some common misconception, and I love when UX gets bantied around on projects. And for myself and my colleague James Duggan, who heads up our client services, we'll re-ask the question. So when someone will say, okay, we've got this project coming and we really need a UX team to gather around and help us with it. What we tend to find in some instances is that what they actually mean is UI, is visual design. And that's just a common misconception, which is perfectly fine. 5-10 years ago, design was design. We actually called it graphic design back in the day. So for those that are sort of not privy to a modern version of what a UXer is, you think aesthetics. You think, okay, they're going to come and do some pretty pixel perfect designs and then they're going to give it to us and we're going to develop that. So that just that misconception that the modern job of a designer, in some instances, those people don't even know how to do visual design. They're sitting there as researchers, they're sitting there as prototypers, they're sitting there as service designers. And what they're really trying to do is is use qualitative and quantitative research to find out the best experience for the user. So the disconnect really can happen where that takes time. And I'll just reiterate the point I made earlier, is that as designers, it's our responsibility to not only take people through how we're going to execute and why we're doing it, but take them through each step in each process. It doesn't need to be a perfect research recommendations document at the end of things. When you're providing your information back, be it prototype, customer validation, whatever it be, there should be no surprises in that room when you're presenting it, because you've already taken people on the journey. And I think that's where some of the disconnect can happen up front. And that's something that we can minimize by just keeping high touch with product people or whoever it might be as part of your business unit.
Yeah, it's a good point with, because like we teach graphic design, we teach UI, and we teach UX. Those are all different courses. I come from a creative agency background and also a software development agency background. And so depending on who, like on the commercial side, and so depending on who you're talking to from a client perspective, they'll phone you up and they'll say one thing when they clear, like it becomes clear pretty early on, they actually mean something totally different. Because, and it's because partially, like I always talk about this, how design can be like a black box to people outside of it, and they don't understand what goes on inside. So, I mean, if there's one thing that this webinar series is really about, it's kind of like opening the black box for people, so that the people on the inside could see out, and then the other way around too.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So moving on to the next question, for non-designers, where does a UXer usually sit within the company's organizational chart? Are they off, I guess, on that black box topic? Are they off in left field somewhere? Like, where do they sit? How does that all work?
Yeah, it's a good question. And look, there's sometimes the reality and then the ideal state. I'll talk to the reality first. The reality is they'll tend to sit within delivery teams. For larger organizations, they have tried different models in the past where they've kept CX and UX quite separate, and they'll keep them in that kind of research bucket that will then feed a UI and delivery team. Then all of a sudden you'll find in 6 months' time there's a reorganization and they've moved UX into more of a delivery technical model. And therefore the remit changes. The focus is on rapid prototyping and yes, quick validation, but let's get things shipped and done to that level. My ideal is sitting somewhere between strategy and delivery to really reinforce the points that we've sort of made earlier on this, which is you need to understand the intent. And for non-designers, that's where they really should sit. And whether or not they've got a seat at the table, depending on the size of the company, on the actual strategic initiatives and what they've done, that's sort of beside the point, but they certainly need to be aware of what the business is trying to achieve. They need to understand the viable aspect of where the business direction is going. So therefore they can have a lens as they're going through that. But at the same time, they need to be aware of delivery constraints, executions, timelines, all those type of things. So for mine, it's sitting somewhere in the middle, that they understand that they can interpret the strategy very well into the user intent, and they can sort of, coming back to that lovely Venn diagram, that they can sort of at least empathize or fulfill the information around all those different circles to get the right outcome in terms of a user experience.
Right, okay, thank you. And for designers again, say a designer is just started at a company, big company, and they have to deal with another department, like they have to do internal research, for example, with another department. How does that interaction go? Like, are they in charge? Is the head of that department in charge? Like, where's the power lie? And like, how do you navigate that situation?
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's interesting because I've been on both sides. I've worked in-house where consultants have come in, and I've also been on the consulting side. And what tends to work and what doesn't very quickly is that when you come out of doing any type of training with UX, it's powerful because it's with the best intent that you're trying to get the best experience for the user. So of course you want to preach. You want to preach to the choir that this is the best way forward, and this potentially may be the only way forward. And I've worked with evangelists in the past, that really want to sort of beat the drum of UX. But rather than doing that, it's similar to what Eric's point was made earlier, which is use your techniques, use your skill sets, use your newfound powers to probe and understand people in different departments around what are their motives and what are their needs. In my mind, it's sort of sitting somewhere between. You don't give the orders, you shouldn't be taking the orders, you should be influencing the direction. But the only way you're going to do that successfully is understand the needs and motives of the people that you're working with. If you come in beating the drum and beating your chest, you'll be dismissed. And if you come in meek and quiet and just do your job, then you're not getting the right outcome for the user either.
Yeah, I think I always say, just make yourself indispensable. Make them realize
exactly.
that you can make their piece of the business better. You can make them look good. And suddenly you're a champion of them. And then it changes the whole dialogue. And as soon as you can be, in my experience, anything really, as soon as you're working with someone to solve a problem together, that's when you don't even have to do like rapport building. Suddenly there, and you're working and you're excited, the energy levels go up. It's pretty cool.
And I think that an extension to that point, Eric, is that's why the early ideation process, don't do it in isolation, and make sure everyone in the business is heard, whether or not you agree or disagree. No idea is a bad idea, and no question is a bad question. They're just coming from different lenses and different angles, but as long as they're heard, that's where you start to get that buy-in on the journey and the path that you're about to take as a UXer. Yeah,
one thing I love that we use in like my creative agency days, when you're doing like a branding workshop, which applies to UX, I think, as well, is the concept of the parking lot. When you've got lots of ideas coming out and it's a little bit off topic, it's a bit askew, but you still want to, acknowledge that it's a good idea, and it may be a good idea. So you just put something off in the parking lot, and like that's to be revisited at a later date without letting it completely railroad the entire session, I guess.
Correct. Yeah, but underscoring the fact that it's acknowledged.
The acknowledgement is a big aspect. If you go, that's not interesting, like get the hell out of here. You've lost that person forever, basically, in one fell swoop. So
correct.
You got to be really, really careful about that when you are interacting. I mean, one thing that I also harp on constantly about is just, if there's one thing designers need to be good at, stakeholder management. Like if they can't do that, then it's really going to limit your career.
Correct. Can't agree more.
So, sorry, I'm just looking at my stuff here. So we're running a bit short on time, so I'm going to skip past a few of these questions. I might just go to the fun ones, actually. For non-designers, do you think it's worth their time to learn the basics of UX themselves? Like how far down that path would you recommend they go?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because when, again, we couple UX with design, right? So initially, for those that are really far removed from design, the initial thinking is, well, I'm not a designer, but the actual definition of design has completely changed. I'm, as I said, terrible. I came out of a multimedia degree realizing very quickly that, yes, I knew how to use Photoshop, but by goodness, I had no natural skill set in terms of creative design. But I'm still see myself as a design and UX practitioner, because the UX methods in which you can learn and discover are ubiquitous. That they're not necessarily there to solve customer needs. They're there to solve any challenges in departments. So you'll get an opportunity to learn different frameworks, methods, canvases that can help use creative ways to solve problems. And that doesn't matter if you're sitting in a call center in operations, finance, whatever it might be. So you'll always get something out of this stuff, regardless of just, yes, understanding a UX role and having more empathy from them. There's really robust stuff that you can take as frameworks in your own industry or your own job.
Yeah, I mean, I use so many human-centered practices now in my sort of role, just as leading my department. And I came in like having worked in all these design spaces, but on the commercial side. So I came in with a lot of imposter syndrome personally when I was starting to, give feedback on sort of UX work and service design work. But I've kind of got over that now, because I realized that I'm able to look at things with a non-designer lens, which actually can be really useful. Because I have to kind of sometimes in a friendly way, like bring HCD practitioners like out of design land when we're talking to non-designers, like in classes, like when we teach non-design intro courses, you have to be like, you're not speaking to people who are their goal is not to be a designer. It's to take some of the tools from the design space and utilize them. So I've kind of gotten over that, and it's really like interesting for me to now have some of those tools available to me as a non-designer. Really, it's pretty neat. I've really enjoyed that journey myself.
I was going to say that you also realize the power you bring through your different your different path, Eric, to where you got to, is that actually in its own right brings a completely different lens again, which is it's highly valuable in its own right. And I mean, I'm similar. I'm from a product background, but I know that can bring a positive lens into design as well.
Yeah, and made me feel good about sort of having something to contribute when I learned that. Slowly got over the imposter syndrome, slowly. So last two questions, and we're going to go into the questions from the crowd, which looks like there's a lot of. So I'll caveat now, we probably won't get through all those, but we will do our best to answer them in the follow-up email that we send out tomorrow, which will have some other useful information for future webinars, etc., on it as well. Last question, though, kind of a fun one. For non-designers, what's a cool UX term that they could casually throw into conversation that'll make them sound really cool and smart?
Synth. Everyone loves synth.
Ooh, synth.
No one has time for full words anymore these days.
Especially in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. IA is another good one. Information architecture. Just throw it loosely. And contextual inquiries. Everyone loves contextual
I do
inquiries.
like contextual inquiry as well. So feel free, non-designers, just drop that into a sentence. Absolutely don't explain it, and just move on. And everyone's going to be like, whoa, that guy really knows what he's talking about. And then flipping that around, I mean, I guess this could be for anyone, like for either of us. For designers, what's a cool business term, maybe from the product owner space or something that you can use as a designer?
Yeah.
That people are like, well, that guy gets it.
So my first job was with Census in Yellow Pages Online. And I kept hearing the phrase COGS, and no one ever explained it to me. So I literally had to go and research it. It's cost of goods sold. How much does it cost to actually get a product out the market? So just throw COGS whenever you can. And if you're speaking to strategists, just talk horizons. Everything's in horizons.
Everything's
Horizon 2, 3, 4, just everything's in horizons.
Yeah. Everyone always likes to talk about the fourth industrial revolution.
Exactly.
That's a big one. I also hear ROAS a lot, which is like from the marketing world, return on ad spend.
That's
in the digital space. I mean, some UXers will find that they're basically, like hand in glove with the marketing team if they're a digital shop front, for example. So that all comes in really big there. So, okay, enough out of me and my questions. So I'm going to scroll back to kind of the beginning. Apologies, I'm going to kind of skip through these because we may have answered some along the way. Oh, here we go. Okay, someone's, Amin has put in a scenario. So imagine your business is doing well, setting the scene. All of a sudden, your competitor changes their app UIs into attractive ones from, I guess, ugly ones they had before. Should you be in a hurry to change your app to match their beautiful new UI? And when should you do that, and how fast should you move? Cool question.
That is a great question. It's interesting because competitor influences can really send you from a logical mindset to holy crap, we've got to change things, and we've got to change things now. When people change the aesthetics, they're doing it to play catch up. They're doing it for their own instances to sort of identifying the fact that they might not have been meeting their own user experiences. But what is your data telling you? What is your sales telling you? What's your revenue telling you? What are the trends happening for you? It's more directly related to what's happening as an impact to your business, rather than going, holy crap, they've just changed their aesthetics and their app's looking a lot prettier. We've got to pretty up the hell out of our app as quick as we can, or website, or whatever it might be. So you need to look for the quantitative trends and the impacts as a result of what a competitor has done, and whether or not you can actually tie that directly back to what the competitor has done. Is it external forces? Is it other things at play that might be having a negative impact to your business? But no, I wouldn't be rushing to do an upgrade to a visual design based on a competitor's. I would need some quantifiable evidence to suggest that is directly impacting us before we'd even look to review what our user experience look like. But you should be constantly iterating on getting your product or service better over time, and sticking with your plan unless something dramatic happens.
Yeah, I think that's a good opportunity also to use some of the things that we were talking about in this session of look into the back end of the business, and from a strategic perspective, like, okay, that competitor just released new UI. Like, are you targeting the same audiences, like the exact same audiences? Are you positioned in the same place in the market as them? Do you have a better product? Are they just trying to, you know, put lipstick on a
goat?
Cow, pig?
Yeah, pig.
I went with goat, apparently.
That's cool. I like that. I'm going to use that one.
You get the idea. Either way, it's not a pretty picture. Okay, just in the interest of time, I think we'll move on. All right, from anonymous attendee. All right. When coming into a project for a client, I'm literally just reading this, so hopefully it doesn't go sideways on me. A lot of stakeholders I'm working with will have 10, 20 years of experience in the industry. And I'm just trying to, oh, good question. I'm just trying to start and learn for the project. So sometimes I feel a bit out of my depth, and I'm learning a lot. What are your thoughts on how to avoid sort of feeling a bit out of your element?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. Yeah, and look, I've had that in the past as well, where there is an element, and there always will be, an imposter syndrome. It's the reality, right? So if you don't have the experience, embrace that you don't have the experience, but you also bring other lenses and other things that you need to take account for. So one thing I used to do when I always used to start a job was almost do a bit of a pros and cons of where I sat, not only with that project. So what are the things that I can bring to that project, and what are the things that I need to learn during that project, and just having a sense of self-awareness when you're coming into something, to not sit there and say, well, they've got more experience, but what does that actually mean? Does it mean that you don't have as much experience in your direct UX practitioner as being a UX practitioner? What other elements can you bring? And then it's always difficult in a group environment when, again, you've got some loud voices, people that have been there and done that. So just try to make time with those people individually. Try to understand their backgrounds, how they grew. Try to learn from them as you go through. But don't underestimate your own capabilities and your own background and your own experiences. And the best way to do that is making sure that you build those one-to-one relationships, that you get some advocacy from them. So when it's your chance to speak in a group environment, that people will want to hear what you have to say, because they know more about you and they know the experiences that you can bring.
Yeah, I think another one of the beauties of UX and like the research side in particular is that you kind of have to come with a I don't know anything mentality to begin with. And I mean, I think there's actually like a flip side to, like, a danger to a very experienced UXer, because they have that I know everything syndrome, where they've seen it all before, but every project is different. And so if they come in with that lens, you could almost be the blank slate that they need. And just generally adopting this like sort of learning, absorbing information is a good way to sort of like not reveal how little you kind of know in terms of experience. You're like, exactly. I'm just taking it all in. It's different. Oh, you guys need to slow your roll over there. I'm doing the right thing by knowing nothing.
Exactly.
All right, so we're running very short on time, so I'm just gonna scroll randomly through here and pick a question. Hopefully I don't take the last 3 minutes to come up with a question. I don't understand that one. That one's a little bit too detailed or too specific. Okay, I'm just going to read this. What are your thoughts on the difference of UX designers of TOB products and TOC products? As I've encountered lots of situations that TO products care less for the user experience.
Yeah, so, and we sort of talking about sort of more B2B versus
I can only assume so. Something to business as opposed to something to consumer. I've actually never heard that phrase, but yeah.
So it's interesting. We're working with a client that's it's purely B2B. Their secondary is B2C, but the same. I mean, it's easy to say the same rules apply. In essence, sometimes it doesn't. It's actually. It really has a dependency on a lot more of the functional things that need to get done with B2B, because it's for B2B, the relationship in selling business is to business, it's a different proposition because you've got what tends to be a high yield, high value proposition. The customer group is a lot smaller, and the results of that relationship have far greater reaching impacts to a business. So if you get it wrong on a B2B level, there can be massive ripple effects where with B2C, it's en masse. You're trying to sell to a greater amount that might potentially be a lower yield. So B2B, I almost think just that the mantra is to take the time. I actually think there needs to be more research done with B2B, more user experience done with B2B, because it has, I'm speaking very generalistically, but it has a massive impact if you get these things wrong. So we're finding that there's a lot more B2B projects that are coming up that are doing the right thing, which is spending far more time in the qualitative space to really unearth the pain points when interacting with B2B. So I actually think it's becoming more and more important, but they can have different lenses, of course, but it's not to say that it's more or less any more invaluable for UX in B2B.
Yeah, totally. Like I've spent my whole career in B2B, and like the impact of like a bounce is so much greater because there goes $1 million client instead of someone who's going to buy a $50 product. So we're right at 12 o'clock. So we're going to wrap things up very quickly. I will just say from the Academy XI side, thank you very much for coming. Hopefully you found this valuable. Thank you very much to Kelvin from our very own. We will be sending out an email follow-up tomorrow. We'll have newsletters that will be going out on HCD topics. We'll also be talking about our next webinar that we've got upcoming. And some of the courses that we offer in the design space as well, if anyone wants to reach out to have a discussion about a training project. And then I'll just let Kelvin say goodbye as well. And I think you had a little bit of something to say. Yeah, just guys, keep an eye out for our very own. Just follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow us on Facebook if you like to. Look, we're starting to really hopefully see the other side of the business impacts of what's happening in the world today. We're starting sort of to see a slow growth for us as well. We'll be putting up position descriptions and opportunities as they come up in the next coming months. So please keep an eye out for that. And please feel free to reach out via LinkedIn if you've got any questions, thoughts. I'm happy to take them. Yeah, and by all means, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I'm happy to grow that community. So again, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day, and you'll get that email tomorrow, and hopefully we'll see you on future webinars. Bye, guys.